In the 1970s, Ted Bundy is believed to have murdered dozens of women and girls all across the country. He decapitated at least 12 of his victims, escaped twice from jail.
From the beginning of history, serial killers have lurked in our streets and neighborhoods, leaving behind a trail of terror. But there are some killers whose shocking cruelty and thirst for blood make others seem almost harmless in comparison. These are the most chilling, truly evil serial killers in history, whose horrific acts have shocked the world and left an unforgettable mark on society. Their crimes go far beyond what most can even imagine, earning them a spot among the darkest figures of all time. Let's dive into the chilling stories of the most evil serial killers in history. Number 15. Ramadan Abdel Raheem Mansour. In one Egyptian town, something truly unsettling is happening. All across the streets, businesses are oddly cashing in on the dark legacy of one of the country's most infamous serial killers, Ramadan Abdel Raheem Mansour, also known by his chilling nickname, El Turbini. From restaurants selling sandwiches named after him to butcher shops branding their lamb cuts in his name, and even tuk-tuk drivers advertising their rides as El Turbini, the entire town seems to be wrapped in a strange fascination with this terrifying figure. But the reality behind the name is horrifying. Mansour wasn't just a criminal. He was a cold-blooded killer. Born into poverty and neglect, he grew up on the rough streets of Cairo and joined a violent gang early on. After gaining status in the criminal world, he branched off to commit something even more sinister. Between 2004 and 2006, he led a group that preyed on homeless and runaway children, most of them aged 10 to 14. Luring his victims onto trains, Mansour would drug, assault, and eventually murder them, sometimes tossing their bodies onto the tracks to make it look like an accident. He and his accomplices operated across several Egyptian cities, from Alexandria to Giza. Shockingly, Mansour confessed to killing 32 children, but investigators believe the real number may be even higher. The nickname El Turbini came from his habit of hopping on moving trains, often using them to escape crime scenes. His arrest in 2006 sent shockwaves through Egypt, yet somehow his name became urban legend, blending horror, curiosity, and now, disturbingly, commercial appeal. Number 14. Vasilei Comarov. Back in the 1920s, Moscow was gripped by a terrifying mystery. People kept disappearing. Then, like clockwork, their bodies would show up the next day near the city's bustling horse market. Locals were scared, the police were stumped, and panic spread fast. For a while, no one had the faintest clue who was behind the killings. That changed when suspicion fell on an unlikely figure, a soft-spoken horse trader named Vasilei Comarov. To the public, Komarov seemed like just another man trying to make a living in post-revolutionary Russia, a time when the country was still reeling from civil war and widespread poverty. But when investigators searched his modest stable, they uncovered a sickening secret. Beneath a pile of hay, a bloodied sack held a corpse ready to be discarded. And that was just the start. Authorities soon uncovered that Komarov was far more than a horse dealer. He had turned murder into a grim routine. He would place ads in the local paper offering horses for sale. When buyers showed up with cash in hand, he'd lead them to his stable, offer them vodka, then brutally kill them, usually with a hammer or by strangulation. His wife, Sophia, helped cover up the crimes by cleaning up the scene and hiding the bodies. Komarov eventually confessed to 33 murders between 1921 and 1923, but the real number may have been higher. At his trial, he showed little remorse, speaking of his crimes with chilling detachment. He attempted suicide multiple times in prison before being executed by firing squad in 1923. Number 13. Thiago Henrique Gomez da Rocha. Thiago Henrique Gomez da Rocha, known as the Beauty Killer, was a cold-blooded serial murderer whose actions shocked Brazil. Before committing each of his horrific murders, he would ambush his victims in isolated spots. His tactic was chillingly simple. He would shout, "Robbery," to confuse and disorient them, causing them to freeze in fear. While they stood frozen, he would steal their belongings. But his killing method didn't end there. After robbing his victims, Gomez would pull out a revolver and shoot them point blank, often in a public place, without mercy. One of the survivors, a woman who managed to escape his clutches, later spoke to the media, revealing the disturbing words Gomez had said during her attack. He taunted her by saying, "You're looking at my face. You're looking at my eyes. What, you think I'm beautiful? Tell me I'm beautiful." His strange, almost psychopathic need for affirmation was as terrifying as the killings themselves. For just 7 months, Gomez claimed the lives of 39 victims. His targets were primarily women, homeless individuals, and cross-dressers, those most vulnerable in society. His ability to move through society unnoticed for so long led to widespread fear, particularly in Sao Paulo, where most of his murders occurred. The victims, often living on the margins, didn't have the same protections as others, making them easy prey for someone like Gomez. In 2016, Gomez was sentenced to just 25 years in prison for his gruesome crimes. However, at only 35 years old, his sentence means he could be eligible for parole in the future. Number 12. Fernando Hernandez Laya. Fernando Hernandez Laya is often regarded as one of the most horrifying serial killers in Mexico, and his crimes are so chilling that they've even overshadowed the brutality of many notorious drug cartels. What makes Hernandez stand out in the annals of criminal history is the fact that his killings weren't motivated by typical reasons like revenge, greed, or anger. Instead, he killed purely for his twisted amusement. Psychological evaluations revealed that Hernandez took a perverse pleasure in the act of murder, which speaks to his shocking lack of empathy and the deeply disturbed nature of his psyche. His case is often studied by criminal psychologists due to the chilling disconnection he had from the suffering of his victims. Hernandez's criminal journey started in the early 1980s, with his first arrest occurring in 1982. He was arrested again in 1986, but it wasn't until 1999 that his name truly made headlines. During this arrest, Hernandez confessed to an astonishing 100 murders, though experts believe the actual number might be much higher. His killing spree spanned over 5 states in southern Mexico, including Guerrero, Chiapas, and Oaxaca, where he was suspected of being responsible for at least 137 deaths. Despite the gravity of his crimes, he was only convicted for 33 of them, which raises an unsettling question. Did Hernandez inflate the number of his victims for infamy, or was he genuinely incapable of remembering the full extent of his bloodshed? What set Hernandez apart from other killers, even those in the violent world of drug cartels, was his meticulous, almost surgical approach to murder. Number 11. John Wayne Gacy. It's not every day that an execution feels like a reason to celebrate, but in the case of John Wayne Gacy, many people felt it was justice finally served. Gacy, often called the Killer Clown, was one of America's most chilling serial killers, hiding a monstrous secret behind a seemingly normal life. His first known murder happened in 1972. He picked up a young male prostitute, fulfilled his twisted desires, and then got rid of the evidence. From that point on, things only got darker. Gacy developed a disturbing addiction to killing, but what made him especially terrifying was how well he hid his true self. By day, he was a respected member of his community. He was involved in local politics, and even shook hands with First Lady Rosalynn Carter during a campaign event, smiling in photos like any proud citizen. But behind that smile was a man capable of unthinkable evil. What shocked people even more was Gacy's love for dressing up as Pogo the Clown to perform at parties and entertain sick children in hospitals.
I'm a clown! There's nothing to be afraid of! I bring fun and joy and laughter to the world!
He once joked that clowns can get away with murder. No one knew how horrifyingly true that joke was. Everything began to unravel in 1978, when a young man named Robert Peist went missing after meeting Gacy about a job. Suspicion grew quickly, and police eventually got a warrant to search Gacy's home. What they discovered was straight out of a nightmare: the remains of 29 boys and young men hidden in crawl spaces and buried around his property. 4 more bodies were later found in a nearby river. Number 10. Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez's chilling words to the police in 1969, "I am the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low, perhaps even a complete animal," speak volumes about the darkness inside him. His journey into horror began after he was arrested for car theft. While in prison, he was brutally assaulted by 3 fellow inmates, an experience that seemed to awaken a terrifying monster within him. After killing the men who attacked him, it was initially believed to be an act of self-defense, resulting in only a few extra years in prison. When Lopez was released in 1978, however, he had become far more sinister. He began his reign of terror across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, committing a spree of violent crimes that included the rape and murder of young girls. His crimes earned him the nickname, the Monster of the Andes, after the mountain range that stretches across these countries. In 1979, a flash flood exposed the bodies of 4 of his victims. Lopez's monstrous behavior was further revealed when he tried to adopt another girl, only to be thwarted by a brave mother who stopped him. In a short time, his murder count reached triple digits. He was convicted of 110 murders and confessed to another 240. Shockingly, in 1994, Lopez was released for good behavior, granted a $50 bail, and required to report to police every month. However, in a turn of events no one expected, he failed to comply. His whereabouts have been unknown ever since, leaving the haunting possibility that he could still be out there today. Number 9. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was one of the most terrifying criminals in American history, not just because of what he did, but because of how normal he seemed.
In the 1970s, Ted Bundy is believed to have murdered dozens of women and girls all across the country.
He had the looks, charm, and confidence of someone you'd trust instantly. He was studying law, volunteering at a suicide hotline, and even dating women who had no idea about his dark side. But behind that carefully crafted image was a cold-blooded killer. In interviews, Bundy came off as calm and articulate, but now and then, his mask would slip and something sinister would show. Just a flicker, but enough to unsettle anyone paying close attention. He knew how to manipulate people with ease. According to Dr. Thomas Weiger, a psychology professor at the University of Kentucky, this is textbook psychopathy. They wear a mask of sanity, he said. It means they blend in by pretending to be just like everyone else, until it's too late. Bundy's lies and manipulation helped him escape the law more than once. He was arrested several times and even managed to escape from custody, twice. During one of those escapes, he fled to Florida, where he went on to brutally murder more women.
He decapitated at least 12 of his victims, escaped twice from jail,
including 2 sorority sisters, in a single night. Though Bundy confessed to 30 murders, investigators believe the real number could be far higher, possibly over 100. He was executed in 1989, but many details of his crimes remain unknown.
Bundy was sentenced to death and died in a Florida electric chair in 1989.
Before his death, Bundy said he wished to be studied so scientists could understand the mind of a killer like him, but he never fully opened up. He stayed in control until the very end. Number 8. Mikail Popkov. One cold, eerie night in the 1990s, a woman was walking home alone after a fun night out when a police car pulled up beside her. The officer inside smiled and offered her a ride. It felt like a kind gesture from someone meant to keep people safe. But as the minutes passed, her gut told her something wasn't right. He wasn't heading toward her house. She would never make it home. That officer was Mikail Popkov, an evil man hiding behind a police uniform. By day, he seemed like a hard-working cop, but deep inside, he was filled with hatred, especially toward women. He believed he had a twisted mission, to cleanse the streets of women he considered immoral. He started with sex workers, but soon, any woman who partied, drank, or simply walked alone at night became his target. Popkov's killing spree could have ended years earlier.
The sex attack most of his victims, all female and aged 18 to 50.
One of his victims, a 15-year-old girl, survived a brutal attack. Beaten and left for dead in the woods, she somehow made it home and told the police that Popkov was the one who hurt her. But in a shocking twist, his wife, also a police officer, gave him an alibi. Her word and his carried more weight than the girl's, and the case was dropped. For years, Popkov continued his horrifying crimes, eventually killing at least 78 women, maybe even over 100. Locals called him the Angarsk maniac. It wasn't until 2012, when DNA testing had improved, that investigators finally connected him to the crimes. What they uncovered was one of Russia's most chilling and deadly serial killers, someone who had used the very system meant to protect people to get away with murder for nearly 2 decades. Number 7. Alexander Petushkin. Imagine someone saying, "Life without murder is like life without food." Shocking, right? Those chilling words came from Alexander Petushkin, better known as the chessboard killer. He wasn't just any criminal. He was a cold-blooded murderer who used chess as bait. In a quiet park in Moscow, Alexander would walk up to strangers and politely ask if they'd like to play a game of chess. With his friendly smile and calm attitude, he seemed harmless. Some might even say charming. After a few friendly moves and some small talk, he'd offer his new acquaintance a drink, usually vodka, near the grave of his dog in the park. To most people, it looked like a lonely man trying to make a human connection. But once they agreed to walk a bit deeper into the wooded paths with him, things turned dark. Alexander would suddenly pull out a hammer or metal pipe and strike them brutally. He'd then drag their bodies to a nearby sewer and dump them there,
before killing them with axes, hammers, knives, screwdrivers, and spades.
His twisted goal is to kill one person for each square on a chessboard, 64 victims in total. Eventually, his horrific spree came to a halt when he invited a female co-worker to the park. She sensed something wasn't right and secretly gave her son Alexander's name and phone number before she left. When she went missing, her son alerted the police. Although Alexander denied any involvement, CCTV footage from the Moscow metro showed them together shortly before she vanished. That was the final piece of the puzzle. Alexander Petushkin was arrested, and, thankfully, justice caught up with him. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he now remains. Number 6. Flores Valdo de Oliveira. Flores Valdo de Oliveira, famously known as Cabo Bruno, had an unconventional journey that turned him from a Brazilian police officer into a feared vigilante. His career in law enforcement began with good intentions, as he wanted to protect his community. However, he quickly became disillusioned with Brazil's justice system. He was frustrated by how many criminals he arrested ended up being released, often due to legal loopholes or lenient sentencing. The constant feeling that criminals were getting away with their actions led to his disillusionment with the system, and eventually he resigned from the police force. Cabo Bruno then took matters into his own hands. No longer bound by the law, he became a self-styled vigilante, hunting down suspected criminals in his local community. His methods were harsh, and there was little room for mercy. He became infamous for his brutal tactics. If someone had a tattoo often linked to gang affiliations, he believed that was enough to seal their fate, making no distinction between innocent people and actual criminals. His ruthless approach led him to gain a reputation as a feared figure, and he operated in a kind of twisted justice system of his own making. However, his violent crusade didn't last forever. After his arrest, Cabo Bruno was sentenced to 113 years in prison for murder and other crimes. He served 27 years in Brazil's notoriously overcrowded prisons, where he maintained his belief that the justice system was too soft on crime. In 2012, he was granted parole, but his freedom was short-lived. In 2015, Cabo Bruno was shot dead in an ambush. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. In a quiet town, a serial killer terrorized the streets, killing for pure enjoyment. He carefully covered his tracks, making it impossible for anyone to catch him. But one day, the FBI got a break in the case and finally tracked him down. When they raided his house, what they found shocked them to their core. Hidden in every corner of his home were 554 bodies, carefully stored in his secret compartments. The townspeople were left in disbelief, unable to comprehend the horror that had lived among them. The killer's twisted game had ended, but the dark secrets of his home would haunt them forever. What could have driven him to commit such unimaginable crimes? Let us have your opinions in the comments section below. Number 5. Javeed Ikbal. In December 1999, a letter arrived at a police station in Lahore, Pakistan, that left everyone utterly shaken. The letter was a confession, but not just any confession. It was from a man who admitted to the horrific abuse and murder of 100 boys. Along with the confession, the letter included directions to his home, signed at the bottom by Javeed Ikbal. This would soon reveal one of the most chilling and notorious serial killers in history. When authorities arrived at Ikbal's home, they were met with a nightmarish scene. Inside, they discovered barrels filled with acid, where the bodies of his victims were dissolving in the corrosive liquid. But that wasn't the only disturbing thing. Scattered around the house were children's clothing, small shoes, and board games, eerie remnants of the innocent lives Ikbal had stolen. Perhaps the most horrifying piece of evidence was Ikbal's diary, which contained detailed accounts of his monstrous crimes, including how he lured his victims and the methods he used to dispose of their bodies. Ikbal's reign of terror began in the mid-1990s, when he lured boys aged 6 to 16 into his home with promises of shelter and food, only to torture and kill them. His victims were often homeless children, making them easy targets. Over several months, he kept careful records of each crime, all of which were discovered in his diary. After his arrest, Pakistani authorities, enraged by the brutality of his crimes, sought a form of justice that reflected his actions. In an act of grim retribution, they decided Ikbal should suffer the same fate as his victims. He was strangled to death and then dismembered into exactly 100 pieces, with each piece symbolizing one of his victims. Number 4. Ahmad Suraji. Ahmad Suraji, a man from Indonesia, was known in his village as a dukun, a type of local shaman or sorcerer. People believed he had spiritual powers, and many women quietly visited him for advice on love, wealth, and other personal matters. Back then, seeing a sorcerer was considered shameful, so these visits were often kept secret. One night, Suraji claimed he had a disturbing dream. In it, his dead father appeared and told him that if he wanted to gain true supernatural powers, he had to kill 70 women. As strange as it sounds, Suraji believed the dream was real, and he set out to follow it. Using the trust people had in him, he convinced women to come to his sugarcane field under the pretense of performing rituals. Once there, he strangled them and buried their bodies up to their waists, with their heads turned to face his house. He believed this would allow their spirits to pass their power onto him. For years, no one suspected a thing, until a rickshaw driver grew uneasy after dropping off a young woman at Suraji's house who never came back. He alerted the police, who made a horrifying discovery: the bodies of 42 women buried in shallow graves on his land. The rest of the country, and eventually the world, was stunned. The case sent shockwaves through Indonesia, sparking widespread fear and outrage. After a high-profile trial that gripped the nation, Ahmad Suraji was found guilty. In 2008, justice was served when he was executed by firing squad. Number 3. Luis Garavito. Born in a small Colombian town, Garavito was one of 7 siblings, and unfortunately, he experienced a lot of hardship growing up. His father was abusive, and Garavito became a victim of physical and emotional torment during his childhood.
Garavito's father was a very abusive man.
Sadly, as he grew older, he fell into the same destructive pattern, and his darker urges began to take shape. By the late 1980s, Garavito's obsession grew so intense that he felt a compulsion to harm young boys at least once a month. He had been abusing children throughout the 1970s, but it wasn't until 1992 that he crossed a terrifying line and committed his first murder. What followed was a gruesome killing spree that went undetected for years. Garavito targeted vulnerable children, often from impoverished neighborhoods, and would pose as a priest or monk, offering them jobs to lure them in. It wasn't until 1997 that Garavito's horrific crimes were finally uncovered. Authorities in Colombia made a chilling discovery near the city of Pereira: mass graves containing the remains of 47 children.
Becoming involved with young boys, this was his preferred victim type.
At first, the police suspected a satanic cult or a gang was behind the killings, never imagining that a single individual could be responsible. But Garavito, when confronted, confessed to murdering 140 boys. His confession was later revised, with the true number believed to be 189. Facing life in prison, Garavito finally seemed to grasp the enormity of his actions. He became known as one of the most monstrous serial killers in history, leaving a wake of horror that still haunts Colombia to this day. Number 2. Moses Sithol. Moses Sithol, often nicknamed South Africa's own Ted Bundy, was one of the country's most terrifying serial killers. But what set him apart was how smooth and charming he was. He didn't drag his victims off the street. He lured them in with promises of hope. Sithol posed as a successful businessman, claiming to offer jobs to young women. To make his lies even more believable, he created a fake charity called Youth Against Human Abuse, a name full of dark irony considering what he was doing. His victims were mostly women who believed they were being offered a fresh start, only to fall into his deadly trap. For a while, he operated in the shadows. But in August 1995, things began to fall apart. Witnesses placed him with one of the missing women, which led investigators to dig into his past. That's when they uncovered his previous conviction for rape and the fake organization he'd been using to lure his victims.
Sithol admitted to every charge laid against him, including breaking into shacks and women and young girls.
Then came a strange twist. Sithol actually called a journalist, Tamzanka Dubé, and calmly confessed to the murders. He even gave the reporter a number to call him back. By the third call, police had traced the location to a public payphone, but Sithol had already vanished. On the run and desperate, he reached out to his brother-in-law, asking for a gun, but the man had already contacted the police. When Sithol showed up, officers were ready. A fight broke out, and police shot him twice before finally arresting him. That's why he appeared in court on crutches. In 1997, Moses Sithol was convicted of 38 brutal murders and numerous. Number 1. Pedro Rodrigues Felio. Pedro Rodrigues Felio, widely known as the Brazilian Dexter, led a life of violence and vengeance that turned him into a legend in Brazil. His killing spree began at just 14 years old, driven by a deep sense of justice after his father, a school guard, was wrongfully fired and accused of stealing food. Felio, believing his father had been framed, shot and killed the deputy mayor, whom he held responsible for the injustice. But his thirst for retribution didn't end there. He also hunted down and murdered the actual thief. This incident marked the beginning of his grim path. As he grew older, Felio moved to Sao Paulo, where he developed a kind of twisted Robin Hood persona. He targeted drug traffickers, robbing and killing them as part of his war against crime. His violence escalated when a gang he was involved with murdered his pregnant girlfriend. Convinced they were responsible for her death, he embarked on a brutal revenge spree, eliminating every single member of the gang. It's estimated that he killed at least 100 people over his criminal career, many of them tied to the drug trade. Even after his capture, Felio's violent ways didn't stop. While being transported in handcuffs to another prison, he managed to kill a notorious inmate, a convicted while still restrained in the prison vehicle. His ability to carry out such acts of violence while under heavy security only added to his fearsome reputation. But in an unexpected twist, Felio reinvented himself in recent years. He became a YouTube star, using his platform to speak out against gang violence, offering a rare glimpse into the life of a man who once lived by the sword. What are your thoughts about these notorious serial killers that the FBI wants us to forget? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below.